Hey everybody. Yesterday we looked at Mark's description of John's work of preparing the way for the coming of the Lord. And immediately after that description, Mark says, in those days Jesus came and from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And if we're wondering if this is the one that John was preparing the way for, then the next two verses leave no doubt, and they give us an indication of the reason why Jesus came to be baptized by John. Because John knew, based on Jesus' character, he didn't need a baptism of repentance. But these verses show us that his baptism was intended to mark him and indicate him as the one that God had promised all along. See, when Jesus came up out of the water, the heavens ripped open and the Spirit descended on him like a dove. And that should take our minds back to Isaiah 42, where God had promised that the one that he had chosen, he would put his Spirit on. And that's exactly where our mind should go back based on what the Father says that we have recorded for us in verse 11. The Father quotes from two Old Testament passages. The first is Psalm 2, when he says, "You are my beloved Son." And Psalm 2 was a messianic psalm, a psalm that looked forward to the king that God would have rule over his people. And the second, "With you I am well pleased," comes from Isaiah 42, where God looks forward to a servant who would also lead his people, but who would be ultimately rejected and would die. And we read about that in a servant song that you know, Isaiah 53. And so what God is saying is that Jesus is both the king that I am going to install over my people, and he is the servant who's going to die on behalf of those people. What was the one thing that the Jewish people, both the disciples of Jesus and his opponents, had a hard time wrapping their mind around? Well, for the disciples, it was certainly the fact that they couldn't believe that Jesus, who they believed to be the Christ, was going to be rejected and die, even when he told them explicitly that that's what was going to happen. And perhaps his opponents couldn't believe in him after he had been rejected and crucified, because there's no way that the king would have been rejected and crucified. And yet, if only they had heard the Father's words here in verse 11, if only they had paid attention to them, where God said not only is he the king, but he's also going to die on behalf of the people, because that is how he will be king over the people of God.